The views and opinions of the show hosts and their guests are not necessarily those of the PTV network, their sponsors, or affiliates. Viewer discretion is advised.
Your empty thoughts and your empty eyes. You're full of Botox to mask your disguise. You say the things no one wants to hear while the sucker next to you is buying you a bear.
We're going to have a little Q&A. And at the risk of sounding redundant, please. Thank you, Mrs. Cameron.
Yeah, talking is not just about getting out what you have to say or just talking, but it's also being prepared to listen to what the other person has to say.
Like a Greek philosopher once said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak.
That was unfathomably deep.
Talk to me.
Oh, yeah.
That's actually a very good question.
You stay classy, web surfers.
And hello and welcome. This is Let's Talk with your host, Michael Johnson. Let me ask you something. What if I told you that Abraham Lincoln was not the last casualty of the Civil War? That he was not even close to being the last? Now, I know what you could be thinking. There is no sure way to know that, as there must have been men who had injuries that died after he died on that night, April 15th, 1865. But I would have to agree. But what if I told you that close to 1,800 men, women, and at least 1 child died 12 full days after Lincoln, all on the same night? Tonight we are talking about the Sultana. She was a 260-foot steamboat paddle wheeler with a listed capacity of 376 people, a third of the size of the Titanic. The Sultana was pressed into service at Vicksburg to take paroled POWs back to their northern homes. When she pulled out of Vicksburg, she had a total of 2,300 passengers on board, almost 5 times her legal capacity. This is Let's Talk, and I want to welcome friends of mine. First off, Pam Newhouse, Norman Shaw, Jerry Potter, and Gene Salaker. I hope I did not butcher that name.
No, you're fine.
Okay. And I guess we decided we were going to start with Norman because we have the reunion starting off.
Yeah.
So, Norman Shaw, you take the microphone, sir.
Okay. We're going to have our 26th annual Sultana reunion this coming April in Americus, Georgia, which is about 10 miles from Andersonville Prison. And we chose that site because about, I guess, half of the men, the Union POWs, came from Andersonville. And we've been moving around the last several years having our reunions. As I said, this is 26th. About the first 14 we had here in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I live, because the 3rd Tennessee Cavalry was from the Knoxville area. Even though Tennessee was a southern state that seceded, there was a large contingent of Tennessee men on the Sultana. So we started having reunions here back in 1988, and we met here for about 14 years in a row. And then Pam Newhouse had a great idea. She suggested we move it around to some of the other cities related to the Sultana story. And the first place we went to was Vicksburg, and then we moved to other cities that's tied in with the Sultana story, like Memphis, Athens, Alabama, Chattanooga, and last year we were in Cincinnati where the Sultana was built.
And so, Norman, why were those cities chosen?
Okay. Well, Vicksburg, of course, is where the Sultana was loaded up with the Union POWs, heavily overloaded, and started upriver. And we actually met in Memphis one year, and the Sultana exploded about 7 miles above Memphis and created a heavy loss of life. And then some of the men were captured at Athens, Alabama. We met in Cincinnati last year because where the Sultana was built. So for different reasons, we've gone to these different cities. And this is the first time we've gone to Andersonville. So we should have pretty good attendance. We usually average about 60 or so every year, and it's the way it's shaping up. I think we'll have that number again. We'll actually be meeting in Americus, Georgia, which is about 10 miles from Andersonville.
Norman, I think you ought to go back to the beginning. How on earth did this all get started? Why are we having reunions? How did you get involved in this?
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Well, there was a strong connection here, as I mentioned, to the Sultana. There was the Tennessee Regiment, the 3rd Cav, U.S., and it turns out that's the second highest number of men from any state on the Sultana. And my first connection was just coming across the book, Transport to Disaster. It's written back in the 60s. And first introduction to the Sultana story. And to my great surprise, we had 3 or 4 individuals here who, at that time in the late 80s, whose fathers were actually on the ship. Steamboat, I guess I should call it. And so I got to meet them, like Edgar Cy Keeble. He was one of them, Mrs. Malcolm Bloom. And then I decided to do a talk on the Sultana, which I presented to our local roundtable. And in that meeting, I invited these 2 individuals as a surprise guest, and they attended. And so that's how I got interested in it. And after the presentation, it occurred to me that there ought to be a lot of descendants in this area, since we had a whole regiment of men, and we certainly did have. I put a notice in the newspaper, just a short notice, back in 1987, actually, and Sunday morning, I put the ad in the paper and said, meet at the Sultana Monument. We have an original monument here put up by the survivors themselves in 1916. And then when I went to the monument, there was about 50 people there that just responded to that short ad, and they were waiting for somebody to show up and start taking names. So that's what I did, and I took names and addresses, and I contacted everybody for a reunion for the next year. That's why I consider 1988 our first official reunion, although our gathering around the monument was like 1987. And since then, the word got out, and I think Pam discovered us about the second year or so, and she became a newsletter editor for a number of years, which was very important to have that communication device. Mm-hmm. And at the very first reunion, if I remember right, this was the 1988, I put an ad in the Blue and Gray magazine. Gene Saliker saw that ad, and since he had been researching the story about 15 years or so, he came, and then somebody told him about Jerry Potter, an attorney in Memphis, and I contacted him, and he was eager to come join us, because I guess you guys were researching all these years, and you didn't really have anybody to talk to much about the Sultana.
Absolutely right.
Is that right?
That is right.
And so Jerry and Gene met the first time here in Knoxville at the Mount Olive Baptist Church. We had our first reunion, and we had the Sultana monument that was, as I said, paid for and erected by the Sultana survivors from Knoxville, is in the cemetery on the hill behind Mount Olive Baptist Church. And they actually had met there a few times through the reunions, the Tennessee reunions. There were some up north also. And so Jerry and Gene came, and they got to meet each other and found out that each been researching the story for several years, and became friends and shared research. And I like to think from that first meeting we produced 2 books through them. So maybe let them pick it up and talk about their research and their books.
Okay. Jerry, you want to talk first, since your book came out first?
Well, I really had no connection with the Sultana. All my family ancestors fought for Forrest, that probably captured most of the prisoners on the Sultana. But in 1978, I saw a painting of the burning of the Sultana in a local bank here in Memphis, and it had the date, April 27th, 1865, and it was a very graphic painting of the boat burning at night with a lot of people out in the river around the boat. And that really captured my attention, and I started researching it and decided to write an article. I had gotten one article published in the past and a historical study published. So I started writing the article. I read the one book, like Norman, Transport to Disaster by James Elliott, And he ended the story, the book, by saying all the official records had been destroyed, that the government had created during the one court-martial of Frederick Speed, a captain, and all of the commissions, military commissions that had investigated the matters. So I wrote an article, but then I was in Baltimore in 1981, I think. It's been a long time ago. But I went by Washington, D.C., and just decided to go by the National Archives to see if they had any records on the Sultana, and I hit the mother lode. I got a complete copy of Captain Speed's court-martial, all the exhibits, and then all of the records, the reports from the commissions and the exhibits and testimony, and I had a copy of all that made, and decided at that point that I had way too much information for an article, so I decided to write a book. And what was really interesting, when I came to Knoxville, I guess for the first reunion, in my trunk I had all those records, and I met this tall guy from Illinois by the name of Gene Salaker, and we started talking, and historians writing books tend to be very secretive about their research information. And so Gene mentioned that he would like to see if there was any records in Washington. And Gene, you can correct me because I'm old. I don't
You're doing fine. You're doing fine, Jerry.
And I didn't tell Gene that year that I had all the records in my trunk. But the next year, I think it was, I opened the trunk.
Right.
If I remember correctly, and even though my book hadn't come out, we shared information, and we just became fast friends. And my book, I could not have written my book without Gene Salaker.
And ditto, Jerry. I could not have written my book without you and the information that you graciously gave to me.
So we're unusual as far as historians.
Jerry.
We tend to be secretive until we get to know each other. Then we just open the trunk and let him have everything. But
Jerry, I have a question. I have a question from the chat room. Where did you see the painting of the Sultana in Memphis?
It was in the National Bank of Commerce in the lobby.
Okay.
And you know, it wasn't happenstance, because usually I did not go through that building, and I was in an area of the building that I almost never went into. But this particular day, I walked into that building, went to that area, and there were several paintings, and it was that one painting that really changed my life forever.
Yeah.
That's when my journey of researching the Sultana started. And I mean, this journey has taken me all over the United States. I've been to Canada, and you know, and I have gotten to know some of the most incredible people that, you know, but for seeing that painting, I would have never met, and I am truly blessed for that.
Yeah.
If I can interrupt just for a moment here, I want to throw something out here. I first heard of the Sultana in a book called Hazard's History of Henry County in Indiana. I'm kind of proud of my Civil War family record. I had 7 family members fight during the Civil War. My great-great-grandfather served 3 tours of duty. His brother Lewis was with the 9th Indiana Cavalry, and he was captured just outside of Athens, Alabama, by Forrest. And he was at Castle Morgan until he was, of course, paroled to Vicksburg, and he survived the Sultana. So that's my tie-in here. But I had never heard of the Sultana until I read it in Hazard's History of Henry County, Indiana.
Well, Michael, when we had a reunion in Athens, Alabama, we did visit that fort that you're referring to, Sulphur Creek. It overlooks the railroad. It dominates, looks right over the railroad track, and that fort is still there. And except there's unusual situation that somebody bought that house or bought the property about 20 years ago, and they built a very modern 2-story brick house in right inside the fort, but which is kind of takes you back when you first see it. But they were very gracious enough to allow our reunion group, about 50, 60 people, to come onto their property during our reunion tour on Saturday. And so we got to visit. The walls of the fort are still there, and the trench around it. So we actually got to tour the fort around, and we went to the wall where the 9th Indiana was located. So just want to let you know, we did see that area, and it's still there where the 9th Indiana was located.
Well, here's the thing gets me, though, that, people want to say that government is basically doing a really number on us these days, but that's never changed. I mean, let's go back to how there was 2 other steamships waiting at Vicksburg that were empty, but yet they filled the Sultana with so many men, and the money that was involved. Let's look into that for just a second.
Yeah, unfortunately, as the Sultana pulled into Vicksburg, before even getting a single person put on board, it had sprung a leak in one of its boilers, and the Captain James Cass Mason, and his chief engineer Nathan Windringer went into town and got a boiler mechanic who came out and looked at the boiler and saw that it should have been taken out of take the boiler out or take the boat out of commission for a while. But James Cass Mason was so broke from money, and they were getting $5 per enlisted man and $10 per officer to carry back up to the north these released prisoners. So Mason didn't want to lose that money, so he cut a deal with the boiler mechanic to take and just shove back the bulge and rivet a plate over the top of it. And the boilers were being repaired while they were bringing all these men from the prison. There's a little rest camp, so to speak, outside of Vicksburg, where these guys had come from Andersonville and from Cahaba or Castle Morgan. And they actually had no idea how many men were still in the camp. They thought there was about 1,800, and as it turned out, it turns out to be like 2,300. And they brought them on board, and as they were going on board, there was a larger vessel sitting there. Originally the Lady Gay, and then they said, we're putting everybody on board the Sultana, and because there was questions of bribery, and there was this and that. And the officers that were loading it said, we're putting everybody on board the Sultana no matter what. And they actually started saying that some of the other boats had malaria on it, cholera. And these guys in their emaciated conditions from being in prison camp said there's no way we're going to survive, a bout of cholera. So they said, well, we can go on board the Sultana, and we'll be crowded for a few days.
I don't mean to interrupt.
And we'll get up to Cairo, Illinois, which was their destination, and they'll get off and get on trains and be brought to, the northern cities.
I don't mean to interrupt.
So it was, the boat was there, but everybody was crammed on board the Sultana.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I need you to back up off the speaker of your phone just a little bit, because I'm getting a little bit of feedback.
Oh, okay. All
right.
Is that a little better?
That's better. Thank you, sir.
That's Yankee voice.
That's what it is. I was going to say, it's these northern voices, so.
Hey, I'm just a damn Yankee that never went home.
Southerners never have any problems talking.
That's right. It comes out nice and slow.
That's right.
And, now wasn't Captain Mason actually heard to have said that he would have given up all the money if he could have gotten these men home?
Yes. Yes, he did. In fact, at one point he tried to stop the loading, and he was basically told that it's now in the government hands and he's got nothing to do with it. And so he basically shrugged his shoulders and went back up on board the Sultana, and they just jammed as many people as they could. And it wasn't that the boat was overloaded, because of course the boat had been built to carry tons of cotton up and down the river, but it was overcrowded. These guys had nowhere to sit down, or I should say nowhere to lay down. Some of them had to sit up with their backs against each other. They had no way to go from top deck to bottom deck to get the food. They actually used the fire buckets, which are round. They're buckets with a round bottom, and they're held in a like a little cutout on the side of the deck. And they're filled with sand, so in case of a fire, you throw this on top of it. And because it has a rounded bottom, you can't use it for mopping the deck and stuff. It sits in this little container. Well, these guys were so thirsty that they threw the sand out, tied some ropes onto the buckets, and they were throwing them over into the Mississippi River to get water. So, of course, when the boilers explode and the fire starts spreading, they can't find the water buckets to put the water out. So they added to their own demise because of the crowded conditions.
I have to ask this, and Gene or Jerry, I have to bring up the alligator.
I did not believe that story when I first read it about the crew had a pet alligator they kept in a wooden crate, and I kept finding story after story from separate sources talking about this alligator. And of course, one prisoner claimed that he took a bayonet and killed the alligator and took the crate and floated to Memphis on it. I'm not sure how he would have had a bayonet since the troops were not equipped.
Right.
But that part of the story always kind of bothered me. But there were several different sources from several different soldiers talked about the alligator on board the boat.
Well, and then Jerry, remember that a descendant of Luganville, who was the soldier, actually came to the reunion several times, and she said, yes, indeed, that was absolutely true. Her relative did do that, so that was first-hand information in a way.
And then just 2 years ago, I ended up purchasing a curio box that the soldier William Luganville, the 135th Ohio Infantry, he had made, and in it was it says on it, it's got a little carving of an alligator, and it says saved by an alligator, and he had a little ivory alligator carved, which was like a cigarette holder. And he's got a little ID badge that had his name, and again, kill the alligator. So all this stuff came from William Luganville, and that's what he was known as the alligator killer. So I think the story's true.
Another question just popped up. Somebody just asked, he's often wondered why they not send the men from Tennessee home by train rather than the long way around by boat. My first thought would be that possibly the tracks were tore up.
Yes, that is the reason. Because basically the war was over, but the war was still going on. There was still some. Joseph E. Johnston's army was still in the field and actually did not surrender until the 27th of April. You had Edmund Kirby Smith was still running around out in the Trans-Mississippi area. So you still had some of the war going on. Only just because Lee surrenders does not mean that the war is technically over. And those tracks have been torn up so badly. In fact, one group of cavalrymen that will get on board the Sultana from the 6th Kentucky Cavalry had been captured like 2 weeks before, tearing up train tracks and stuff like that in Tennessee and Alabama. And so when they were actually put on board the Sultana, they were in really good shape. I mean, they had had spent only a couple of weeks actually in jail. They had been put in jail rather than in prison camps. But so that was the reason why they didn't send any of the Tennessee or even the Kentucky soldiers home by train, because it was easier to, just dump them all on board the Sultana, ship them up the river, and then use the northern railroads to get them back to the states where they had to be.
Okay, well, moving along here, for those that do not know, what exactly happened for the tragedy? I mean, how many days out were they from Vicksburg, and what do we believe actually did happen? Why do they call this the Sultana tragedy?
Well, why don't we let Pam say something? Because, Pam, you haven't even talked yet.
Yes, hello, Pam.
Well, that's okay. Well, but you guys are the go-to man for all the details, Gene. You and Jerry. So, and thanks for adding all those details. I'm just sitting here looking at some past newsletters that I did. I'm sitting here looking at Frederick Speed. Frederick Speed, he just sticks in my craw. He was a loading officer, of course, for the Sultana, and I think we've all discussed this before. There was plenty of blame to go around as to why this happened. But Frederick Speed, although he maybe didn't have a hand in directly loading the soldiers, wasn't it true, Gene, and Jerry, that he arrived after they were all put on, pretty much? Everybody was pretty much on board. But he had a chance to take some of them off. And he said, though, it would be inconvenient to take off with the men, and so they can all go together. And that word, that just sticks in my craw, inconvenient. Because my great-great-grandfather, Adam Schneider, 103rd Ohio Infantry, was one of those soldiers on that boat. And I would think he maybe would have not minded being inconvenienced a little bit, because he ended up dying. He did not, in fact, get home alive. And it was, he left a wife and 3 young daughters. He was traveling with a comrade from his regiment, and they had said to each other after the explosion of the boat and people were jumping, and they said, we'll jump in the water and we'll get home together. We'll get home, and if one doesn't get home, then the other will go and tell their family what happened. So Michael Conrad, in fact, did get home, and he went and talked to my grandmother and great-great-grandmother, and told her what happened, that he did not survive. And I was kind of sad about Michael Conrad. He was a big, strapping young man. He was a butcher before the war, but his health, mentally and physically, he's totally ruined after that. And he only lived about 5 years after in Cincinnati. And I have a letter that says that every year on the anniversary of the disaster on April 27th, he would come to the door of my great-great-grandmother and her children, knock on the door, she'd open the door, and he would just stand there and just cry like a baby. And they just hated to see him come every year. But it didn't last very long, because he was dead within 5 years. And, there were men that were killed outright like that, but there was so much collateral damage. I mean, so many people that died because of the Sultana, because of things that happened. The saddest story that I think I ever heard, what happened was I started doing the reunion, trying to keep everybody abreast of what we were going to be doing for the next reunion. So I ended up doing a newsletter from, I don't know, Norman, 1980 maybe? Or when did the first reunion was? In 88. Okay, 1990, I suppose.
Yeah, about then.
I started.
Right.
I started doing the newsletter, and it was mainly just, I did them 4 times a year, and I was just trying to keep everybody interested until the next reunion. The whole thing was about the reunions, but pretty soon people started writing me and calling me and sending me stories of their descendants, and so it kind of became a chronicle of descendant stories, I think, and it was fascinating, and so I just kept going, and there was plenty of material until just a couple of years ago. I decided I'd no longer do it, but I never lacked for material. I think the saddest story maybe was that there was a man whose 2 teenage sons wanted to join the Army really badly, and he didn't want them to, and finally they wore him down. He said, all right, you can, but I'm going to join with you. So they all joined up together. They were in a battle. They were all the 2 boys were captured, and the father was not. The two boys ended up on the Sultana, and they died. He went home after the war. He was devastated. He knew it was all his fault that his sons had died. So he was on a suicide watch. His family kept watching him. Like he was threatening to kill himself, and they were just watching him. So he was out plowing the field one day, and he had probably a young grandson with him, and he asked the grandson to please give him a knife because he wanted to cut the reins of the horse. And so the young guy gave him the knife, and he plowed to the end of the row, sat down under a tree, and slit his throat. And so there were a lot of stories like that. Maybe they didn't die on the Sultana, but a lot of people did die because of the Sultana.
Right.
I'll tell you what, we do have to.
Own ancestors' colorful history.
Oh, my own ancestors.
Yeah, Adam Snyder.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's take care of that after we get back from break, because I do have some bills I need to pay. So you are listening to Let's Talk, and we're talking about the Sultana. Please come back. We'll be here about 5 minutes, so please stay tuned.
Catch up for discussion live every Tuesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time when we welcome some very cool guests. Check out the hottest topics from around the world, and the lovely Shannon asks, who does that? It's all right here on the new PTV.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. Republican governors have joined the criticism of the White House as the Friday deadline approaches for the across-the-board budget cuts known as the sequester. NPR's Don Gagne has more.
The White House sent out a list detailing the impact of the cuts on each and every state. Like their Republican counterparts in Congress, GOP governors in town for the National Governors Association meetings place blame on the president. Here's Louisiana's Bobby Jindal.
Look, I think the president's trying to force us into a false choice. The reality is there's no reason for these cuts to be made this way. It is the president's job as the chief executive to prioritize and instruct his cabinet secretaries, instead of spending their time going out and trying to scare the American people, to instead say, here's how we would make these reductions instead.
Jindal was joined by South Carolina's Nikki Haley and Wisconsin's Scott Walker at the news conference. Each accused the president of being intent on raising taxes. Don Gagne, NPR News, Washington.
Former Surgeon General C. Everett Koop has died at the age of 96 in New Hampshire. Koop raised the profile of the post during the 7 years he served during the administrations of Presidents Reagan and George H.W. Bush. NPR's Craig Windham reports Koop launched a crusade to end smoking in the U.S. and issued a frank report on AIDS in 1986.
Koop concluded that cigarettes are as addictive as cocaine and heroin, and he started the practice of requiring health warnings on cigarette packs. Koop's report on AIDS stirred controversy when he strongly advocated the use of condoms to prevent the spread of the disease and called for sex education to begin as early as third grade. Koop was a prominent pediatric surgeon before being nominated to be Surgeon General. During his tenure in the post, he was easily recognizable with his Amish-style beard and dress blue public health officer's uniform. In recent years, Koop has headed an institute named in his honor at Dartmouth University with the mission of promoting health and well-being. Craig Windham, NPR News.
Authorities say the search is widening for a 26-year-old man considered to be the key suspect in a car chase and shooting incident in Las Vegas that led to the fiery crash that claimed the lives of 3 people and left others hurt. Las Vegas police say investigators have identified the suspect as Amar Harris and have been looking at areas where he has lived and worked in the past. Harris is accused of firing shots into a Maserati, killing the driver and 2 others after the vehicle slammed into a taxi, which then caught fire. Automaker GM, which for a while following a government bailout was being referred to tongue-in-cheek as Government Motors, is increasingly moving out from under its previous benefactor. Treasury Department, which took GM shares in exchange for loans to the bankrupt car maker, announcing today it sold $156.4 million worth of GM stock, recovering now roughly $29 billion of the $49.5 billion it originally loaned the automaker. A down day on Wall Street to start the week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 216 points. The Nasdaq dropped 45 points. This is NPR. Another major explosion in the Syrian capital of Damascus today, with residents and state-run television there reporting the blast was followed by heavy gunfire. Latest incident comes on the heels of a massive car bombing in the city last week near the ruling Ba'ath Party headquarters that claimed at least 53 lives. It's not immediately clear what was being targeted in the attack or who was to blame for the latest explosion. In New Orleans federal court, BP and its contractors are on trial for the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history. NPR's Debbie Elliott reports billions of dollars are at stake.
The U.S. Justice Department, Gulf states, and private plaintiffs accuse BP and other companies of putting profits over safety, resulting in the 2010 explosion of the Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico. 11 rig workers were killed in the well blowout, and the resulting oil spill prompted an economic and environmental disaster along the Gulf Coast. In opening statements, the lawyer for the federal government, Mike Underhill, said a long series of missteps and reckless decisions by BP amounted to gross negligence and willful conduct. Proving gross negligence could result in nearly $20 billion in civil penalties. BP says the explosion was a tragic accident from multiple causes, not willful or meeting the bar of gross negligence. Debbie Elliott, NPR News, New Orleans.
And the winners are Vulcan, the Roman god of love and smoke, and Cerberus, the three-headed dog that in mythology guarded the gates of hell. Those are the two names that have been wound up winning a contest by the International Astronomical Union to name the two small moons found to be orbiting Pluto. Vulcan was the name suggested by Star Trek actor William Shatner. The planet was home to Mr. Spock in the popular 60s TV series. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
Hi, Michael Johnson here. I'm not sure that you know this, but I was born a Libra, and that's cool and all. Justice, balance, fair dealings in every action. But there is also the issue with duality. Let me explain. I'm the professional broadcaster who hosts the talk show Let's Talk on Monday nights, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But I'm also the long-haired leaping hippie still searching for his life quest on Friday nights as the host of the 70s Ballroom. Will I ever find balance, or will I self-implode? Come check me out every Monday night, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Let's Talk, and Friday night, 8 to 10 for the 70s Ballroom. And you can witness the fun for yourself. We promise you, you will feel all warm and squishy inside if you do. And you know what? Guess what? I snuck up on you guys. You guys were having a wonderful conversation during our break.
I was afraid of that.
And Pam, just for the record, I still refer to it as Pop.
Okay.
Oh, it is.
Okay, good. You're showing your northern roots.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Funny.
So, it's interesting the conversations that people can have when they don't think anybody else is listening. But you know what? We forgot to tell.
What did we say? I forgot what we said.
Well, except for Norman, who of course is in Knoxville, nobody else said exactly where you're from. So, please.
You start with me?
Well,
Ladies
ahead,
first,
Norman.
Pam.
Okay, well, I'll just mention again, I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee, and even though we're a southern state, we had a Union regiment on board the Sultana. So I'm from, and the other end of the state is Jerry.
That's right, I'm from Memphis.
We love it anyway, Jerry.
Go ahead, Pam. Ladies first.
Yeah, Pam, I'm from, now from southern Indiana. I used to be, a little while ago, from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Now I'm from Madison, Indiana, on the Ohio River.
Okay.
And I'm Gene. I'm from River Grove, Illinois, which is right outside Chicago. And I think, Michael, the interesting thing about the four of us is Pam is the only one that really had a Sultana connection. Norman, Jerry, and I just saw an interesting, fascinating story and got hooked on it. But we had no relative on board.
Well, see, that's why Pam and I have such a wonderful connection, because, of course, I'm a descendant, too, so.
Yep. And now I'm here in Indiana, right around where your ancestors were.
Yes, my ancestors came from the Muncie area, if you know where Muncie is.
Okay, yeah, up north.
Right.
So-
Yeah, because I'm as far south in Indiana as you can get. Right on the river.
Okay,
My back window looks over to Kentucky.
we were actually talking about your story or your ancestor's story, Pam, when we had to go to break.
Oh, yes. Well, I'll tell you just a little bit about him. Well, first of all, I found out about him through, there was the family was German. They were German immigrants. They came from Ingelheim on Rhine, which is a place on the Rhine River, just a little bit down from Frankfurt. And they came to Cincinnati in 1854. And I don't believe they spoke any English. My great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother, I think they lived over the Rhine area. And when he died on the Sultana, in my great-great-grandmother's effects later, we found a note written in German, and it said that he and other soldiers had died. He was in the 183rd Ohio, and he and other soldiers had died. A great many of them had died on the Sultana. And before that, he was in a prison camp called Labra. Well, I didn't know anything about that, and I kept looking it up, and then I realized, oh, she meant Cahaba. That's where he was. But I guess what's an interesting story is who he was before he came here. I mean, he was sort of a hard luck guy. If he didn't have bad luck, he wouldn't have any luck at all. This man. He was involved in a plot in 1849 in Germany to kill the Prince of Prussia, and he drew the short straw. He was elected to do it with this group of people that he was Hessian, and the Prussian Prince of Prussia was going to be coming through their town. They knew that, and so he took a shot at him, and he missed, and they grabbed him up, put him in prison. The trial, though, after the trial, he was voted, he was said that he was nicht schuldig, not guilty, but then he was tried in his own hometown, so it's not surprising. But I think things got kind of hot for him, and so he and his family, took his family in 1854 and came to Cincinnati. So then he was 42 years old when he was drafted in 1864, and it's 3 weeks after he was drafted, on the first day of his first battle at Franklin, Tennessee, he was captured and taken to Cahaba, and of course then ended up on the Sultana and didn't come home. So it was sort of a hard luck story all the way around.
Yeah,
and,
really.
We have another
it really
connection,
was,
Pam.
I just want to say briefly, I appreciate so much the Jerry and Jean and Norman here. They're not even, don't even have a direct connection, but yet they've been so wonderful about supporting the memory of the Sultana, and I appreciate it. Just want to say that.
Pam, we have another connection now.
Wait,
I had one of my ancestors that actually died on the march to Franklin.
Oh, really?
Oh,
He had typhoid.
Died on the march to Franklin. Oh, my.
At Laurel Hill, or where was he at?
Actually, it was on the march. He was the company blacksmith, and he got typhoid.
Oh.
And he died on the march to Franklin.
Was 9th Indiana?
Yes.
Wow.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
So, and I also have one other one that died the first day of fighting at Vicksburg.
Oh.
Wow.
So, you see, I'm a true blue All-American.
Yeah, it was a terrible war from all directions.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Somebody, it's amazing the questions that'll pop up when you have a chat room. Somebody asked about what was the medical facilities on board the Sultana, or were there doctors on board?
No, there was not. They did not have, the military did not provide any doctor or nursing staff. I think, and Gene can fill me, I believe there was some...
Sisters of Charity were on board, which was a private organization, and they were there to help, administer to the sick. And there were some hospital stewards put on board to help also. And excuse me, Jerry, for butting in on you there, but
no, I gave you the intro.
Okay, well, thank you. And the ironic thing, some of the chronically sick were kept back at Camp Fisk, which was the camp outside of Vicksburg. But a lot of them knew that, they wanted to go home with their friends, so they snuck on board the trains anyways and got on board the Sultana. And the officers in charge wanted to give them at least some area with some warmth, so they put them on the second deck, which is considered the boiler deck, even though the boilers are the deck below. And they were put on the second deck above the boiler area to get a little bit of warmth, because the heat would come up and they could feel it through the floors and such. Unfortunately, when the boilers do explode, the third deck actually collapsed on top of these guys. So these guys all were in the wrong place. But which probably gets us to what was the cause of the explosion, and the cause was. And pardon me?
Yeah, I said, yes, let's hear this.
Okay. The cause of the explosion was actually just the bad boilers. They were I mentioned before, James Cass Mason was really rough on his boat. He raced it up and down the Mississippi, and in fact, on the trip prior to the ill-fated one, he had won a pair of elk's antlers, which you put up above the smokestacks, to show a sign that this is a fast boat. This is the fastest boat. So if you're shipping freight and you want it to move from one city to the other fastest, you put it on this boat with the elk's antlers. So he had been racing his boat, the Sultana, up and down the Mississippi, but he had no money, and his boilers needed some tinkering with, some repair. He just didn't have the money to do it, and so when the boilers, pardon me?
Or time.
Yes, or time. And so with these guys on board the boat, they're going upriver at a time when the Mississippi was at flood. It was, the snows up in the north had all melted. The Mississippi was out of its banks. At the point where it eventually explodes, they said that the river was about 3 to 5 miles wide, because the Army Corps of Engineers had been busy during the war building pontoon bridges and corduroying roads for the advancement of the Union Army, and nobody was working on the levees that were being broken apart. So when the Sultana's going upriver against this massive flood that's coming down, the engineer, one engineer survived, one was mortally scalded, and he testified that the Sultana was going at its regular rate of speed. Well, that shows you right there, if you're going at your regular rate of speed against this strong current, you've got to be using much more pressure than what the boilers could handle. And a lot of times the engineers would actually tie down the safety valves. So there's a valve on the boilers that will actually pop if the pressure gets too much. Well, they would put weights on it so that it wouldn't pop, and that way the pressure could build up even more and give you that extra power. And there's a theory going around that the Sultana was sabotaged, that some Confederate saboteurs had smuggled in a huge lump of coal, which is about the size of a man's head. They had put some gunpowder inside of it, and at Memphis, when it stopped to unload some cargo, that these guys had gotten on board and had put some, one of these coal torpedoes, so they call it, into the coal bin. And as the Sultana was going upriver, this coal was thrown into the boilers, or into the furnace, which is underneath the boilers, and it exploded and blew out the whole part of the ship. Well, the problem with that theory is that through testimony and through eyewitness reports and structural damage and such like that, the explosion occurred at the back of the boilers up near the top, and it blew upward at about a 45-degree angle toward the pilot house off, which is where the pilot is, the guy that steers the boat. And with him gone, there's no way to turn your boat and head it towards land. So that's why it just floated down the river and burning. Had there been a torpedo, which would have exploded inside the furnace where the coal is, that would have been at the front bottom of the boilers, And it probably would have, because when an explosion occurs, it goes 360 degrees total circle. It would have torn out the bottom of the boat, the hull. Well, the Sultana, the hull is not damaged at all, and the Sultana floats for about 5 hours after the explosion until it finally burns through and sinks about 4 miles above Memphis. So, I mean, the theory that this was a sabotage just does not hold water when it's looked at from those eyewitness accounts and the structure damage that happened to the Sultana.
Can I take you back? This is Gene.
Sure.
Gary. Let me take you back to Vicksburg. And Gene had mentioned that Mason and the chief engineer went into Vicksburg to get a boiler maker to investigate the buckled leaking area of the middle outboard boiler. And the boiler maker's name was R.G. Taylor. And he testified in front of one of the commission, or before one of the commissions, that when he investigated or inspected the boiler, he informed Mason that it would take a really very detailed repair job on this boiler that would take several days. And Mason knew he had to leave the next morning or the next day. And he knew if he did not get a load of prisoners the next day, then some other boat would get them. And so R.G. Taylor walked off the boat initially and said he was not going to have anything to do with the repair work. But for some reason, I think he was probably bribed, he came back and he was not allowed to hammer down the buckled area, but he had to put a thin patch over the buckled portion of the boiler. And when he completed the repair job during the day of April 24th, while the men were being placed on the steamboat, he informed Captain Mason that the boiler was not safe. And during the investigation after the disaster, the chief inspector of steamboats for the lower Mississippi River gave testimony that to me was really the most accurate testimony as to the cause of the disaster. He indicated that the patch was made out of metal thinner than the remaining portion of the boiler, and it could not withstand the normal working level of pressure that a boiler would normally carry, that it needed to carry a lower amount of pressure. And Samuel Clemens, the second engineer that, like Gene indicated, had ultimately died from scalding, he testified before he died that the boiler had the normal level of pressure. And so the chief inspector concluded that the boiler had too much steam and the patch failed that caused the rest of the boiler to explode. And when that boiler exploded, the two other boilers on each side exploded, and that's what led to the ultimate destruction of the boat.
Right.
You know, something I thought about is if you had, you're talking about the piece of coal the size of a man's head with powder in it, that's not going to, even if it blew up somehow, it certainly wouldn't cause the destruction that was created when the boilers blew, because it just tore the inside of the ship out, big hole all through the decks, and blew men into the water. And I just can't believe a piece of coal the size of a man's head filled with black powder could have any kind of a effect like that.
You know, it is always just shaken me to the core to think these men were coming home after 4 years of bloody war. They had their thoughts, they had their dreams of coming home.
And Michael, they had survived prison camp, Civil War prison camps.
Yes, some were at Andersonville. Of course, Castle Morgan's not as bad as Andersonville was from what I've read. But I mean, these men had a right to come home safely. And you know, it had always bothered me, though. The boilers, if I remember right, exploded about, around 2 a.m.?
Right.
You know, these men were having probably the best dreams of their lives. And they wake up to a burning hell. That always shook me to my core.
Well, you know what has always bothered me, and this Jerry, there's one soldier that everybody knows I'm fascinated. John Clark Ely. And John Clark Ely left a diary, and all of us have seen the original diary with the watermarks in the spine of the diary. And on Christmas Day, 1864, after he had been captured, he wrote, "I wonder if next year will again find me with friends and family." And today, you go out to the National Cemetery here in Memphis, you'll find the headstone of First Lieutenant John Clark Ely. He never made it home.
Right.
But what's even more tragic is there's only about 20 to 23 headstones that bear names of soldiers that died on the Sultana. The rest of them are buried with headstones that simply state unknown U.S. soldier. And to me, that is the incredible tragedy.
Yeah, the epitome of it, right?
What I like to mention is that actually, my great-great-grandfather's body was never found, and so we like to say that that their memories are our memories are their only graves. That's it.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's programs like this to keep it alive that Mike's doing for us.
Jerry, I think you wanted to mention the Marion, Arkansas, right?
Oh, yeah. In Marion, Arkansas, they're actually trying to develop a museum, and they're really making progress. And in, I think, May and June of this year, they'll have another Sultana exhibit like they did last year. And Gene was kind enough to loan them a lot of his artifacts, and I did as well. And it's an incredible opportunity in Marion, Arkansas to really see and feel and touch history.
Right. And Marion is right across the river from Memphis, so...
Exactly. That is where... on the morning of April 27th, 1865, the flames would have been visible from both Marion, Mound City, and Memphis.
I want to make sure, Norman.
Yes.
I want you to go ahead and give some free publicity for the reunion this year, and also let Pam talk about Sultana Remembered and the website, because we've got about 3 minutes left for the interview.
Okay, our reunion is April 26th and April 27th, coming up here in a few weeks, and April 27th, of course, is the anniversary of the disaster, and this reunion happens to fall on that date. And again, we're meeting in Americus, Georgia, and I was wondering how people should get a hold of me. Mike, should they get a hold of you and you forward any messages that come in, or how should we do that?
You go ahead and give your email address and also the website for the Sultana Remembered. I'm sure that they will send you around.
You want me to give my email address?
Yes, sir.
Let me do that, then Pam, you can do it's like Shaw, S-H-A-W, Clan, C-L-A-N, and the number 4 at bellsouth.net. ShawClan4 at bellsouth.net. And then Pam's responsible for our website. Go ahead, Pam.
On the website, www.sultanaremembered, all one word, sultanaremembered.com. I've got posted there all the latest information about the reunion and how we can all be contacted. And so that would be great if anybody wants to contact us about the reunion or anything else, just go there.
We all have been friends, although I have not had the pleasure of seeing any of you face to face as of yet. One day I plan on it.
Good.
Wonderful.
But I do thank you. I thank you all for being here and spending this hour with me. Hopefully it's helped send the word out, and I want to ask, would you all come back sometime if I asked?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, wasn't that bad?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Definitely.
Thank you for coming up with this idea. That's a great idea. What great way to spread the word of the Sultana story.
Definitely, and I also wanted to bring up too, because it was, I believe it was Gene talking about the National Archives. Annapolis also has a lot of stuff on the Sultana.
Oh,
Yeah,
I didn't
have
know
a
that.
friend of mine
Yeah.
who
I
actually
didn't know that
graduated
either.
from Annapolis.
Yeah, I didn't either, to be honest with you. So we'll have to go check that out, right, Jerry?
Oh, I'm checking the airlines right now.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys, it is that time, and so I want to thank you all, Pam Newhouse, Jerry Potter, Norman Shaw, and Gene Salaker for being my guest tonight. This is Let's Talk on the PTV network. Hopefully see you all back here next week, Monday, 8 to 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, be safe. You have just been an informative and I hope entertaining hour here at Let's Talk on PTV. I want to thank you for being here, and also to remind you we are here every Monday night from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you have a guest suggestion, well, send it to me at show@lets-talk-show.com. There's also a webpage at www.lets-talk-show.com that you can always check out for information on upcoming guests, guest bios, and a message board so you can let me know how I'm doing. Please feel free to check out the Let's Talk group on Facebook. I hope to see your type faces here next week, same time, same channel. Please stay safe, and as always, many pleasant nightmares.